This one is from Wynn Everett, and Wynn asked the following, quote, "The two political factions in America have become so divorced from the typical American's concerns that they appear almost deranged. There's an absolute chasm in politics right now and wide material agreement among most Americans regarding big ticket items like avoiding foreign wars and healthcare. There are millions and millions of voters that are totally gettable in any way they have never been before. Do you think a third or even a fourth party could be viable, and under what circumstances or conditions?" All right, I could not agree more with all of that. I think a major reason for Donald Trump's victories, and by victory I mean starting in 2016 when he was never even remotely considered a candidate or a politician, and he gunned down the field of all those professional, highly funded Republican politicians, from starting with Jeb Bush and Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz, all through them, got the nomination, and then crushed the Clinton political machine, obviously filled with nothing but political animals, long-term professional career politicians, is precisely for this reason. People understand that both political parties speak a language, live in a world, spend money on things, talk about things, vote on things completely detached from their concerns in their lives. And that's why they've lost faith and trust in most institutions of authority, because they perceive correctly that people in power who are there to ostensibly represent them care about everything other than what they care about. It's so incredibly obvious from how these people speak to what they say. And Donald Trump was the first to come along and sort of break all those rules that people have come to hate about how they speak, how they talk, what they talk about, the things you're allowed to say. And he was basically a weapon to smash that glass, to smash the system that they were so eager to smash. Now, obviously, Donald Trump is now a politician. There's no denying that. Doesn't mean it's bad. Doesn't mean it's good. He's been president for 4 years, spent 4 more years running for president, is now president again. So the last 10 years of our political lives have been dominated by the political figure of Donald Trump. It's clearly the Trump era of politics. He's not really an outsider force anymore. You can't be president twice and having run a third time and almost won, just constantly running for president for 10 years and be a political outsider anymore. He's still an outsider in a lot of different ways, comportmentally and the like, but it's not as appealing, I think, as it once was, and especially now that we're watching in the first 4 months of his term, 5 months of his first term, it was consumed by things like tariffs, which was a major promise of the Trump campaign, no doubt. But I think people ended up feeling like economically they had been beaten upon and crushed for so long, including by the Biden years, that there was, even Trump admitted, short-term pain. The stock market became unstable. It went down. People's investments and retirement funds became less valuable. Small businesses struggled. So that was already kind of a feeling that, wow, we have Trump again, who promised to help us in the working class, but instead we seem to be suffering with this tariff policy that we're being told will have long-term benefits, but for the moment we don't seem to have them. And now political discourse is being dominated by a potential war with Iran that I just don't think most people have spent the last 2 years caring about, or I don't think people think like, I used to always say about Russia, when Democrats are spending all that time on the evils of Putin and the threats posed by Russia, that it just so obviously there's a huge gap between what Democrats spend all their time talking and warning about and what Americans wake up and thinking about. I just know that Americans are not waking up worried about Vladimir Putin and the threat posed by Russia. That's not something they're scared about. They were during the Cold War, when nuclear war was very possible. People were taught to live in shelters, go to shelters. That was very much part of the culture. And there was an existential war between communism and capitalism, and there was a lot at stake. But people don't worry about Russia anymore. They don't consider Vladimir Putin one of the leading threats to their well-being, unless you are an MSNBC viewer. And so there was this gigantic gap between what Democrats were talking about and what people care about. I think that's the reason that they ended up losing. But now you look at what Republicans have talked about. What has Trump done? Aside from tariffs, he's gotten in and he resumed a bombing campaign in Yemen against Houthis. And unleash the Israelis again to continue their destruction of Gaza, which the United States is paying for. Started deporting not people in the United States illegally or who have committed crimes, but people who were guilty of the crime of protesting Israel or speaking out against Israel. I think that's what people were worried about. People in the country legally, PhD students, Fulbright scholars, biologists, chemists, with nothing but a record of achievement, being booted out with new precedent because they spoke out against Israel. I mean, people were definitely worried about illegal immigration, especially people who are dangerous to their children or to their communities. Do you think they're worried about Harvard and Yale biologists who wrote op-eds about Israel? So there's a lot of that as well. And now we have this war with Iran, which, you know, if you ask, you can get polling answers or polling data about anything the way you want based on how you ask the question. So if you say, look, Iran is about to get a nuclear weapon, should the United States do nothing? Or should it try and do what it can, even if it means military force to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon? People are going to say, yeah, we don't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon. But if you say Israel has launched a war against Iran, do you think the United States should involve itself militarily in a new foreign war in the Middle East? Overwhelmingly, people say no, and there's polls showing both. And I don't care what the polling data is in terms of if you ask somebody, do you want Iran to have nuclear weapons, yes or no? I do not believe that Americans are waking up saying in the morning, like, wow, I couldn't sleep last night because I'm really worried about the prospect that Iran is going to get nuclear weapons. By every account, they don't even have the missile capability to send one to the United States. Even if they could, why would they? North Korea doesn't. Everyone understands it's going to be immediate mutual suicide. I just don't think that's what people care about in their lives. And polls constantly have shown that. I don't think people elected Donald Trump to go to war with Iran or to restart the bombing campaign against the Houthis. And that's all they're hearing about now. That's what the Trump administration is focused on, which is not what the American people are focused on. I know this from polling data, I cover politics. And we've all seen over time what Americans care about and what they don't care about, and when they feel like their interests are ignored and when their interests are not. Now, I want to just answer this with a story about Marjorie Taylor Greene. Not really a story so much as kind of my thoughts on Marjorie Taylor Greene. So I want to be very honest and say that I really like Marjorie Taylor Greene. I have always liked Marjorie Taylor Greene. I think she's a good person. I think she's sincere and earnest about the things she says and believes. Obviously, Marjorie Taylor Greene has said things over the last many years that I don't agree with, that you can describe as whatever, outside of the realm of what reality is. I think most politicians do. I think Donald Trump running around talking about how Iran's about to get a nuclear weapon and use it or whatever, that's way outside the realm of reality. To say nothing of what was said about the Iraq War and the 2008 financial crisis. But the reason I like Marjorie Taylor Greene is because she is what a lot of people wanted, found so attractive about Trump. Marjorie Taylor Greene was never a politician. She didn't run, she wasn't like on the city council and then in the state legislature in Georgia and then working her way up to the Georgia State Senate and being groomed by the Republican Party to one day run for Congress. You know, like kind of a career politician. That was not Marjorie Taylor Greene. Marjorie Taylor Greene was, you know, she has a business. The business is prosperous. She's not like incredibly rich, but probably like upper middle class. She lives in like an upscale, you know, Georgia suburb. And she became very politically active by the MAGA movement in America First. It like resonated with her just as a citizen. And then she got politically involved and probably had some connections and money that helped, but no, like she wasn't part of a political dynasty. Her father wasn't the governor or anything. She really like just did the kind of classic Mr. Smith goes to Washington type of political trajectory where a citizen wakes up and says, you know, I really am starting to get angry and concerned by what my government is doing. I think it's totally on the wrong track. The things they're saying make no sense. I don't think they're representing our interests. And she got very inspired by Donald Trump and the MAGA movement and took it seriously. And she suddenly became a member of Congress. And yeah, because she's somebody who was not a trained politician, she often was not on script. And she's charismatic, and she says things that get people riled up, and that brings a lot of media attention. So that's why there's so much attention on Jasmine Crockett as well. Not because she's some important figure in the House Democratic caucus, but because she says things that get people angry, and cable news loves that and builds those people with a big platform. And that's what happened to Marjorie Taylor Greene. But I don't think Marjorie Taylor Greene was ever doing or saying things on purpose to make people angry. I think she was doing and saying things that she really believed in, that if you go to her district, I guarantee you people like her, people who live near her, people who live in her district are also saying, which is why they voted for her and keep re-electing her, despite how much the media hates her and says she's so evil and bad. And I've talked to her before. I found her to be exactly the same when talking personally to her as I have when I've listened to her in public. I've had her on the show before. And one of the things that really I found so interesting and so kind of eye-opening about Marjorie Taylor Greene is, she's been reluctant to criticize Donald Trump too much previously. I remember I had her on the show. She was one of those people where she was very much against the Ukraine war, making all those good arguments that I agree with about how we have, women who can't get baby formula and our communities are falling apart. Why are we sending billions to finance a war that has nothing to do with us? And I remember I asked her, does that apply to Israel, that rationale? It seems like it should, does it? And she didn't have the confidence to say, yeah, also Israel. That's a very sensitive topic. She knows that. But sometimes you get to Washington and you got to find your way. You've got to understand how things work, especially if you're not a career politician. I remember when I started journalism, there was a lot of things I didn't understand. I hadn't done it full time. I thought I knew about things, but once I really started looking, I started learning things and realizing how much I didn't know. And so it took me a while to kind of get my legs and feel like, okay, I have a good, secure sense of where things are. And I think that's where she is. And when Donald Trump announced this new bombing campaign in Yemen, she was very outspoken against it. And the way she made the argument really struck me. She said, you know what? I've been a congresswoman now for 6 years or whatever it is, representing my district, but I've lived in my district forever. Nobody in my district even knows what a Houthi is. Nobody talks about Houthis. Nobody has met Houthis. Nobody is threatened by Houthis. Nobody fears Houthis. Nobody understands why are we spending all this money to bomb the Houthis? What does this have to do with us? And I thought about it. I was like, that's the benefit of having people who are not professional politicians. One of the things that made Kamala Harris such a terrible candidate is that she worked her way up that ladder from her mid-20s. She's basically been a politician her whole life. She got elected to San Francisco District Attorney, very ambitious. You can go find national interviews with her because she was doing things like imprisoning parents for truancy if their kids didn't go to school. And Good Morning America and those type of shows loved her. She was on there. She parlayed that into a run for Attorney General of California, won that, worked her way up to the Senate, California Senate, and then became vice president. And she never had a moment where she was off script, where she was saying things that people in Washington would be like, what is that? She clung to those scripts like her life depended on it. She was petrified of saying anything that official Washington would find odd or strange or disapprove of. And as a result, she was totally vacant. She never spoke naturally. She never spoke like a human being because that's all she knows is she's been clicked into the political system, and she speaks about the things that her donors care about, that other politicians care about, that the media she consumes talks about. And it's completely, she has no ability to say what Marjorie Taylor Greene said. No courage to say it even if she understood it, but no basis for understanding it either. Now, you can take that too far. Before 9/11, nobody in America, for the most part, understood what Al-Qaeda was, thought much about Al-Qaeda. It didn't mean the government should not do anything about Al-Qaeda. Of course, sometimes the government has to work on things that are real threats or problems that most people don't know about or think about or understand. But I think there's a basic wisdom to the idea of asking, especially when we're going to war, wait, why are we bombing and killing these people in Yemen? What do they have to do with us? And at the time, they were not attacking American ships. We've gone through that timeline before. And the only reason they had been previously was because they knew we were arming and funding Israel's destruction of Gaza. So even that was because we were financing and fighting a war for a foreign country. And the way Marjorie Taylor Greene said it was like, a Houthi? Well, who knows even in my district what a Houthi is? I'm not going to cheerlead a war against the Houthis that have nothing to do with the lives of the people who sent me to Washington. And then when it came to this war in Iran, she lost all fear or concern about recognizing the relationship between the United States and Israel and in whose benefit that relationship is, and who's really pushing and shaping the decisions of the United States Congress and the executive branch when it comes to war. And I think she has enough confidence now. She's seen enough. She's learned enough. She's read enough. She understands enough. And Marjorie Taylor Greene is not dumb. I'm sure Democrats will say she is. She's not dumb. She's smart. She just doesn't speak like Kamala Harris or Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden, because she's not from that. She doesn't emerge from that. She emerged from a much different, she's a citizen. And that was the idea, by the way, of the Congress, was we weren't going to have a professional class of politicians. We're going to have people who represented their constituents, get sent to Congress for a few years, and then go back to their lives and, do what they were doing previously. And that's the kind of person she still is. She's very much still a resident of her Georgia district, much more so than a creature of Washington. And so she can think about things and say them in the way most Americans are still thinking and saying about them. And when it came time for the war in Iran, too, she was like, I am just sick of having all of our money and all of our service members be put in harm's way for these wars that have nothing to do with our country. Ukraine is not our country, and Ukraine's wars are not our wars. Israel is not our country, and Israel's wars are not our wars. And I think she's able to speak so plainly about these things and insist that we focus on the things that her constituents and people in America really care about, because she's not subservient to or taking orders from a political party or a kind of system. And there are other people like her in Congress too. I'm not suggesting she's the only one. I'm just saying she's been very noticeable over the last 3 months, 4 months, because especially when it comes to foreign policy, that's where politicians typically step most delicately. And she's not stepping delicately at all. And to me, she's become a voice of great clarity and confidence. And I think she's earnest about everything she's saying. And I think she's talking about these things the way most people talk about them. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.